Hi, it's Hugh again. Got a good mate named Alan Hirsch. Many of you have probably read some of his books. One's called The Shaping of Things to Come. And oftentimes when Alan is speaking, I'll hear him say, "Hi, my name is Alan Hirsch." He actually has a much cooler Australian accent, but he'll say, "My name is Alan Hirsch, and I come from your future." And everybody laughs. And then he begins to talk about the reality that growing up in Australia afforded him, that he really was probably 20, 30 years ahead of where many of us are eventually going to go. So in our previous session, we talked a little bit about how it's not Kansas anymore, that the world is actually changing in so many different ways, and therefore the church is being put up against many tension points that it really maybe wasn't prepared for or didn't take seriously at the beginning. And I grew up in Portland, Oregon, so our first church plant, we figured about 1.5% of people under 30 were actually in a church in Portland. So, I grew up in an environment where if you met another Christian, it was actually kind of like, "Oh, wow, I met a Christian today, honey." Where other parts of the world, in the South, Texas, whatever, there's still a lot of people that feel like, no, we're mostly Christian, and so we'll be fine. Right now, again, I just want to remind you, some of I hate to do stats, but the stats are bad. I travel and work with about 120 denominations, and none of them are on the incline. So every single denomination is feeling the pain of declining membership, declining ability to influence brand new people towards faith. I think it was probably even 10 years ago, there was a stat that if you have 4 children and you go to church every Sunday and you pray before meals and you do the normal good Christian thing, that you should only expect that one of your 4 children will actually follow you into the faith. And so, I think we've been feeling the rumblings, even in our own family, wondering what's going to happen with our kids. The cultural shifts that are happening that even our own children are dealing with. They're not really dealt with by the church, or they're dealt with in a way that even our own children are going, "I don't know how I'm going to navigate Jesus and all the stuff that's hitting me out there." And so when this really comes down to the Bible conversation, a lot of the Bible is about the resourcing or the money or how this plays out. But just think about it this way. If the predominant, I hate to say it this way, but if the business model of the local church and this idea that we would continue to reach new people and eventually we would disciple those people into learning how to give of their resources or tithe, if that has been the predominant sort of business model that everything else is hinged upon. What I mean hinged is that because of the growth of the local church in the early 1900s, really up until 1950, then we start to see a decline. But up until that point, people did expect denominations were growing, and therefore conversions were happening. People were giving more money, and so then we would build seminaries. We would then build Bible schools. Every denomination had their own kind of retreat centers, and we just had a lot of extra that we could do because the model was working. Well, when you have the decline, then everything that has been based on the upward mobility of that model is going to actually go down with it. And so if we're looking at the entire picture of the American church right now, or really the church in the West, you can see it if you've traveled to other parts of the world. If you've been to Europe, they're your future, where you see buildings on every corner, but the buildings are either a daycare or a pub. You wonder, could that happen in America? Yeah, it is happening in America right now. And so as we talk about that, we don't want to call it a failed business model, because there are still some churches that are seeing growth and they're seeing the increase of finances so they can still do stuff. But for most of you watching this, you come from the future. You're already starting to feel it. And you're probably in agreement with me that most of those things are beginning to struggle. So you see seminaries struggle, you see Bible schools struggle, you see retreat centers being sold out. People are not buying this anymore. There's cultural shifts that are happening, even in regards to Christians and how they view giving. They don't necessarily want to invest in things that they don't see working anymore. And there's a lot of people that will even sit in your churches, but they go, "I'm not going to give my money here." And it literally is a value shift for them. They go, "I'd rather just give my money to a single mom in my neighborhood than give it to this. All we're doing is paying for the building and trying to keep the lights on." And that's not a big enough story for people right now. So as we think about the future of the church, we're going to have to deal with the pain of what's going on. And, a couple points I would just make right now is that it's not just sort of a business as usual thing. We're really talking about lives here. We're talking about your heart, people, pastors. Read another stat that came out just a few years ago that was conservative. It said about 85% of all pastors right now would immediately take the financial buyout if they could make a living doing any other job, okay? And what that means is that for the sake of the good news, the gospel, many people are buying into an old failed system, if you will, that's literally ripping their families apart and it's ripping their heart apart. Sometimes, I talk about this in what we call the kiss of death. Kiss of death is the story of Judas. And you all remember Judas. We would call him one of the worst guys in the New Testament, the guy that sold Jesus out. But really, that's not apparently the real story of Judas. Judas, we think, was probably 19, 20, 21, young guy, living in a poor area. So probably, he and his family are just trying to make ends meet. And Judas ended up being a part of the 12. He was somebody that Jesus chose. We don't know why exactly. And apparently Judas was actually the best of the lot, because when they were trying to decide who would hold the treasury for the boys, everybody, and then Jesus, of course, would have had to sign off. They went, yeah, let's give the money to Judas. Okay, so Judas, not the worst guy in the Bible. Judas probably just like you and I. And if I were to ask you, do you think Jesus, having spent all that time with Judas, do you think Judas loved Jesus? I think if you think about it realistically, of course, Judas would have loved Jesus. He saw all the things that Jesus did. He saw the miracles. He got personal time with him. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say Judas emotionally, deeply loved and respected Jesus. But there comes a point in the story where we know that the Jewish and Roman leaders, they want Jesus out. And so they knew the only way you can take a guy out that really loves somebody is you have to actually get them at the greatest sense of need that all of us have, and that's the issue of money. So we don't know exactly how it played out, but they must have slid enough money across the table to Judas. I think it was a couple shekels, right? We think a couple months' wages, Imagine that. Pick your monthly wage, double it, and if somebody slid that number across to you, might you make decisions about ministry that are different than the way you used to think? For a while, everything that Judas knew about Jesus was he was the guy that I loved, the guy that I just wanted to follow and serve, like I would do anything for him. And then all of a sudden, Judas is faced with the question of using Jesus for his own ends. And later on, when Jesus begins to talk about the pull of money and ministry, he makes a statement that's very prophetic. I'm still dealing with it all the time, where he said, you cannot serve both God and mammon. It's a prophetic call against what we call the kiss of death, because Judas eventually kissed Jesus on the cheek, kissed this man that he used to love, and really sold out with this kiss of death. Eventually, it destroyed him personally, and he ended his life, okay? We don't see that maybe in that, vivid of a picture, but we do see it in the reality that many of us, when we just take the full paycheck and we take the full expectations of a congregation, oftentimes where we used to just love Jesus and just want to serve him and do whatever he wants us to do, we just go, yes, anything. I love you, so grateful. Where all of a sudden we tie our livelihood or our perception, our ability to pay for stuff that we want, provision for our family, all of a sudden, Jesus is not just somebody that we follow, but he's somebody that we use. And it starts to erode your heart. You're not so much playing the game because you believe in everything. You believe in the church. You believe in working hard on sermons and trying to grow. I mean, it's not that the whole heart is bad, but I think you know what I'm saying. There's something in it where you go, am I really doing this for him or am I doing this for me? And so when we think about the future church, I don't want you just to think about, will we be able to keep a membership and keep the lights on? I want you to think about your own heart, how you want to lead, how you want to live, and whether or not the future church that you're going to be a part of is going to be something that will literally just flow out of this amazing love that you have for Jesus, or it will just be playing the game. Mammon, interestingly enough, When Jesus, he's not saying that money is a problem. He's saying that a certain type of money, mammon, was the currency of the Romans, a currency of an alternative kingdom. And the Romans, we know, would use money to coerce and control people. That's where we get what we would now call our contemporary consumer model, where you're doing things because you hope that it will somehow cause people to behave in a certain direction. And when it doesn't go well, oftentimes pastors do crazy things. We try to sell a Harley on Sunday to get people to show up. And I mean, you've seen all these things that we do. Or we just don't make a decision in our church to try to really challenge our parishioners not to be consumers, but to actually sacrifice and give their very lives for the gospel. And so what Jesus is saying is, you cannot serve me and this system of control and fear and coercion and worrying about trying to keep consumers coming to your church. The church that Jesus built is not built on consumers. It's built on disciples. People that literally would say, I'll give everything for this. And so don't just think about you and someday this building that you may be in. Think about the church as God's people and the story that your kids are going to grow up seeing and the life that you're going to actually live as a story. To me, that's the opportunity of the future church for you. Think outside the box, not just as a method of ministry, but as a way of life. You are now, bottom line, you live in a pure mission field, 100% mission field. And what a mission field doesn't need are little tweaks to the present methods. And it doesn't need more of the same, for sure. What a mission field needs more than anything in the world are missionaries. People that, like the men and women of Issachar, who understood the times and go like Paul as a missionary. He said, for you people, I'm going to work amongst you so as not to be a burden. That's what we need. We need a band of missionaries that look at the cultural shifts. We look at all the issues related to how people perceive us, and we go, for this to work, for us to really reach people, to give them the good news, we're going to actually have to live a different story. To me, that's the great opportunity of the Bivo life.